How to sell a home when you have a tenant in the home. You're listening to the Home Seller's Advantage. I'm Aaron Zapata, your co-host.
And I'm Todd Anderson, your other co-host. We are the Bald Brothers team at Impact Realty Group with Real Broker, and we are here to give you the Home Seller's Advantage.
You can find us online at www.baldbrothers.tv. Again, that's baldbrothers.tv.
Or you can call us at 833-305-BALD. That's 833-305-2253 today.
Hey, welcome back. Thanks for joining us here at the Home Seller's Advantage. We are excited that you're deciding to spend another 25 minutes with us. That's all we got, 25 minutes.
25 minutes, not even half an hour.
Not even. That's good. And if you listen to us...
But it's time well spent.
It is. And if you listen to us in time and a half, like I listen to my podcast, it's a good 18 minutes.
Yeah.
And you are on your way. But perhaps you joined us today because of the topic. And the topic is an interesting one because tenants in California have a lot of rights.
Yep, and we've done previous episodes where we've talked about being a property owner that with tenants in place. So we've discussed this before, but the truth of the matter is tenants do have a lot of rights. And the question oftentimes we get when people want to sell or divest of investment properties in California is, do we need to get rid of the tenants? And the answer is it really depends. You can sell a property with a tenant in place.
Yep.
Or you can actually have the tenants move out. We'll phrase it politely, have the tenants move out and then sell it as a vacant home.
Yeah, so if you were looking for the short answer, you just got it and you can hit episode completed. Yes, you can sell a home with a tenant in place. But let's talk about some of the pros and cons of doing that because let's talk about the pros.
Yeah.
Okay. The pros of selling a house with a tenant in place. The number one thing is that you can sell it now.
Yep. Ease of just getting in and opening it up to the market right away.
That's right. You don't have to wait. So if you just signed a lease with a tenant and they've got 10 months left in it, the way California real estate works is that lease goes with the land.
That's right.
You bound yourself and your property to the lease. And so however many days are left on that contract, that has to stay in place.
Yeah. If the tenant has a lease contract, that's not null and void just because you sold the home.
Yeah, you can't just say, hey, I'm selling. Unless
the tenant is in some sort of breach of that contract. And that's a whole separate issue that I think we've also discussed before. But the good news is that if you do want to go that route, there are lots of buyers and investors that are willing to take the property off your hands with a tenant in place. So that is the good news.
Yeah.
But there's another side of that coin as well.
There's the bad news. Well, let's not call it bad news.
It's not bad news.
Let's call it the realities of selling with a tenant in place. So let's talk about that same buyer pool. Your investors who want to look at your home and buy your house with your tenant is not going to pay top dollar for that home.
That's right.
They're not. They are taking on the risk of having a tenant in their house that they did not vet. They did not screen. They do not know anything about them. All they have is a name, a phone number, maybe a social security number, something on file that you are transferring to the new owner that says this is the person and their rent history. We don't know if they're going to change tomorrow as soon as this escrow transfers and they got a new owner. Maybe that tenant, changes their personality and it's no longer a great relationship like you've had. So an investor buying a property like that is going to hedge their bets. The best way an investor knows how to hedge their bets is investing less.
Yep.
So a huge con is that you will not be able to get maximum dollar for your property.
Yeah, and it is all relative because that can be a setback and a con. But let's focus still on the positives of that too, because you might be a seller that's in a situation that, one, you just don't want the hassle of dealing with trying to now have a tenant move out and all of that. It also might be a financial burden for you to hang on to this property.
That's my
and it might be a financial burden with the property itself. It also might be just a financial burden in other areas of your life where you just need to sell the home and you need to sell it quickly. And the holding costs are more significant than the benefits of just selling right now, even if it's at a price that's less than you would do if it was a vacant home.
Well, and to go along with that, when you talk about the money, if you decide to sell your home and you notify the tenant that you're selling it, they may stop paying rent.
That's right.
Which is lost money.
Mm-hmm.
They may cause you a legal headache,
Mm-hmm.
which could cost months of lost rent plus legal fees.
Mm-hmm.
They could potentially destroy the property,
Mm-hmm.
which we've seen happen.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definite financial considerations when you're looking at selling it with a tenant. And so, again, that's why an investor might come in and say, hey, I'm going to offer you less for it now. But when you start adding up those other potential risks, it might be the best choice for you
Mm-hmm.
right now.
Yeah. And if you're just tuning in right now, you're listening to Home Sellers Advantage. We are the Bald Brothers team with Impact Realty Group. If you want to contact us, perhaps you do have an investment property that has a tenant in place and you want to know what to do with it, you can call us at 833-305-BALD. That's 833-305-2253. You can also go to baldbrothers.tv to get all of our information there. You can also add your name to our mailing list, which goes out pretty much weekly, sometimes more than weekly, so you can be informed and keep in touch with what we're doing. But we'd love to help you and answer some of those questions. Now, I do have a question for you. Let's break it down to some practicality.
Break it down.
So we're talking about, right now, we're talking about two different ways to sell. One is to sell as is with a tenant in place to an investor pool or a buyer pool. Sometimes it's not necessarily an investor, but who wants to purchase it. They will pay less than what you would get on the open market with a vacant property. So expect to receive more for that property. Let's just take an example. Let's say it's a property that you would say, if you look at the comps for the neighborhood and you were able to have the home as a vacant home and it's in decent shape, and let's say the comps say that it would be worth $750,000. Now, you don't want to go that route, and you have a tenant in place, and let's say it's a decent tenant. It's not like the home is the tenant isn't in arrears or anything like that. Just a standard tenant situation where you've got a tenant in place, and let's say they have 10 months left, and you want to sell it to an investor. What would be a reasonable consideration if you think it's worth $750,000 on the open market, vacant, but now you're selling it with a tenant in place? What sort of numbers would you think that we'd be looking at?
I have no idea.
That was a buildup for you to call us, because we would have to look at your particular community.
Exactly. Every situation is different.
Mm-hmm.
And the duration of the tenancy, is also a factor.
Mm-hmm.
And is your rent above market?
Mm-hmm.
That's a factor.
Yeah.
There are, certain Airbnbs that are also trying to be sold.
Mm-hmm.
And the question that comes up with that, which is really not something we even talking about, but is that considered a tenancy?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a tenant? Is that a contract? You've agreed to sell. You've agreed to rent out your house in March or in April or in June through Airbnb, and are you obligated to do those things? We're not answering those kind of questions, but we have seen sellers try to add value to those properties because of the Airbnb rental income. Yeah. And that's a different kind of situation.
And by the way, that's a whole different can of worms, because some communities you can't have an Airbnb.
Exactly.
A different topic maybe for another day.
If you like more about that, just comment. Let us know if you want to know more about Airbnbs and how that works on the sales, because we have had some experience with those as well, and it does change the dynamics of the real estate sale. So let me talk about this tenant question that you asked, and I clearly failed the handoff in how I responded, which happens time to time. And so
I was teeing it up for you.
We're a team. There are some good plays and some bad plays. I was actually thinking, when are you getting to the question? I don't know what the question is. Like, didn't you say you're going to ask a question? Like, this really long buildup. So anyways, back to that whole situation. If you are going to sell a property and that tenant has more than 2 months left, it is likely going to be an investor. And here's why. The lenders who lend on property for buyers who say they're going to live in it. So an owner-occupied buyer coming to buy a house that they want to live in. So they're not going to want your tenant in place.
Yeah.
Okay. And neither is the bank. The bank is going to look at the tenant contract. And if there are more than 2 months left, they're going to think of it as an investment property. And so it's going to be a different kind of underwriting,
different type
for
of
the
product.
buyer, different loan product. And that's going to cost more to the buyer, make them put more money down typically. And so that's going to, again, limit the buyer pool. But if they have less than 2 months left, then they can do a regular, normal purchase contract sale. So the yes to you can sell it, all of these pros and cons, all of the timing involved has to do with how long is that tenant going to be there?
Yeah.
And so if they got less than 2 months, you want to give us a call right now because you should have already started the process.
Yeah, if they got less than 2 months, the buyer pool is very different than if they got 10 months.
Well, Todd, let's talk about the reality of tenant-landlord relationships when the landlord announces that the sale is going to happen. How many times have we heard they're such good tenants?
Yeah, they're such great tenants, and then all of a sudden we've got a listing contract, and this will kind of move into the next way of selling it that we're going to talk about in just a moment. But right now, let's talk about the relationship. So the next thing they do is they issue a notice that typically it's a 60-day notice for the tenant to vacate. If you want to vacate, all of a sudden the relationship changes.
Yeah, and it does because
they're losing their home.
They're losing their home. And so even the best tenant that's been there months, we had one that was there for 25 years. Think about that. They paid their rent for 25 years. Good tenant. The moment that owner said, hey, I'm sorry, but I have to sell the property for medical reasons, I need the money.
Yeah.
That tenant became really difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
Hired the local lawyers that help people for free. I mean, it went through 6 months of back and forth, and he wasn't paying rent. Basically saying, look, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Because for the first time, your goal as the landlord and the tenant goal as the tenant are no longer in tandem. They're no longer in agreement. See, when you have when you're a landlord and you have a tenant, as long as they're paying the rent, you are happy. And so your goals and dreams are in alignment. You're providing a need and they're providing a check. They need housing, you need the money. So as soon as that gets severed, the relationship goes south. We've seen it with family
over and over again.
We've seen it with great tenants. It's happened. It happens. And so you got to know that this is coming if you are going to sell a property with a tenant.
Yeah. And sometimes you might be selling the property with the tenant that's currently in place, but the contract will say, and you'll be selling it saying that the home will be vacant by the time the keys are delivered, by the time the new owner takes possession. But there might be a position where you're selling it and the tenants are still there, even though they will be moving out. And so there's that kind of transitionary type of sale. So you have the sale with it's known, the tenants are in place. Then you have the sale that it's a vacant home and everybody sees it as a vacant home. But then you have that kind of intermediary where it's going to be vacant, but during the position of the marketing and the sale of the property, there's a tenant in place. And so there's kind of that gray area too, where you have buyers that are a little bit skittish on whether or not you're successfully going to be able to rid the property of the active tenants. And so there's kind of that in-between area as well.
Well, it is. And that's why most, if we talk about the negatives of selling with a tenant, that is a huge negative, nobody knows what's going to happen to that tenant. Because once you've given the news that they're losing their housing, they tend to go from great tenant to not so great. And now you're handing that off to somebody else.
There's a possibility they may not be paying their rent. But there's the other side that if you do end up having the tenants move out and is vacant, now the property is costing you money. You've got holding costs. You're paying taxes and insurance and
at a minimum.
At a minimum. And in most cases, you've also got a loan on the property as well. And for the time that it's vacant, you're not getting any income coming in. So the need to sell is so you've got the benefit that now, let's say that you have the tenants no longer in place, you got a vacant home, you can sell it now for a higher value, but the risk is now during the time that you're marketing it, there's no income coming in. So that also has to be factored into this equation.
Yeah, and we have found and counseled many people where they felt that was a better risk because that's calculated. They know exactly what their holding costs are if it takes 60 or 90 days to sell it and to get it prepped and all the way through escrow. Great. But if they have a tenant that decides to sue them and not pay the rent, now they've got holding costs, no rent, and legal fees.
Yeah.
And so clearly each situation is going to be different. And if you're just tuning in, welcome. This is my name's Aaron, and this is Todd here with me. We are the Bald Brothers team at the Impact Realty Group. This is the Home Seller's Advantage. We want to talk specifically to home sellers, people who are thinking about selling homes. And so if you are in that boat, we are here for you.
Yep.
We want to give you the advantage in today's market. We navigate Southern California real estate markets, and we know that there are inherent uniquenesses about our area.
Uniquenesses.
Yeah, uniquenesses. And so we just want to say, hey, we're here. You can get a hold of us. You can call our toll-free number. It's an answering service, so you're not going to get Todd or myself right away, but we will call you back. It's 833-305-2253. That's 833-305-BALD, B-A-L-D. And if you'd like to go to the interwebs, you can find us online at baldbrothers.tv, baldbrothers.tv. And you can hear the podcast. You can look at all of our videos. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, all those fun places as well. So
you can also just Google Bald Brothers Team, and you'll probably find us that way as well.
Will.
Yes. So we're talking about selling a property with tenants in place. With tenants, and we first of all talked about selling them with the tenants in place. In other words, the tenant agreement transfers with the property. The new owners are going to have to honor that tenant agreement. The second is kind of an intermediary where you're going to be selling. The home will be vacant by the time the keys are turned over, but you may have tenants living there in the property at the time, which does make some challenges sometimes because now you got to work for showing the home. If the tenants are not cooperative, oftentimes those are homes where the listing basically says drive by only.
Yes.
Make an offer and then we'll
do not disturb tenants.
Do not disturb tenants. Yeah. And so those can be challenging. That's kind of the intermediary. And then, of course, there's the other side, which will give you the most value for the home. And that's to actually have the tenants removed. When I say removed, I don't mean you're going in there and
evicted.
You're evicted. I was avoiding saying evicted because it's part of the transaction.
It is.
And by the way, there are some legalities that go along with that. If the tenant has been there less than a year, you can give them a 30-day notice. In most cases, your tenant has been there longer than a year, and then you need a 60-day notice.
Just a legal disclaimer, go check with your attorney on those dates.
Yep.
Because your tenant might have some special circumstance.
That's true.
That overrides what we just told you.
That is very true.
But by and large, that's the general rule of thumb.
Yep.
Under 1 year, 30 days, over 1 year, 60-day notice.
Yeah, and I should specify,
should.
Although it's in the show at the very end, you'll hear it in the end, we are not your realtors. And so we don't know your situation. So anything that we're saying is not advice that we're giving to you specifically. We cannot give you that advice unless we have a contract.
That's right.
Where we are representing you. So we should make that very clear because Aaron brings up a very important point. That's the general rule, but you may have a specific tenant agreement that is outside of the generalities that I just mentioned.
So I want to walk a potential homeowner through the situations that we see.
Yeah.
And that is a homeowner needs the money.
Mm-hmm.
And so they decide they're going to sell the property with a tenant.
Yeah.
And that tenant now is at odds with the landlord.
Mm-hmm.
So tenants require notice to show.
Mm-hmm.
We often have difficulty doing showings because it's never convenient for the tenant to allow people through there.
That's right.
Even if it's in the lease contract that says that they will be given notice and they are to provide access, they rarely do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes difficult to show. And then, because now we do have a misalignment of goals between the tenant and the landlord, oftentimes the tenant is there.
Mm-hmm.
And they are there with the intent to delay the sale.
Mm-hmm. That's
because
right.
the longer it takes, the better it is for them.
Yeah.
And so I can't even recall the number of times because it happens so often where I'm showing a home to a buyer and the tenant is there and the tenant begins to list
all the problems.
Oh, by the way, and they begin to...
There's black mold.
Yeah, there's mold.
I was sick for months.
There's a crack over here, and this landlord didn't fix this and didn't do that.
Fire hazard with the electrical.
Right, exactly. I mean, they're like a walking home inspection, right, of everything that's ever been wrong.
Yeah.
Even if it was like 10 years ago. Well, my landlord didn't fix this plumbing. Then they just leave it at that. You know, it's like there's just this animosity that builds.
The home is haunted.
You know, remember we had that.
That's why I mentioned we had a situation where that's a whole other story for a different time.
We should have done that on the other episode we did about the dark side of real estate. So they go through and they're usually there. They're then bad mouthing the property, sometimes the landlord, and their goal is to really delay the sale.
Yeah.
And so again, that hurts you.
Yeah.
And if you've ever talked with Todd and I about your specific property, you will hear us say over and over, it is our recommendation to our clients that they have an empty house to sell.
That is always our recommendation if you can do it. If you're in a financial position where it's okay to wait the 60 days to have the tenant evicted, and then also if you have the ability, typically a rental property is going to need some repairs. You probably need to replace the carpets and do some repainting, some basic stuff. If you put a basic amount of money into it, that will maximize, in most cases, that will maximize the return on your investment. And the benefits of selling the home at top value will outweigh, even if you've got holding costs. Hey, if you can net $50,000 more than you could have, which, I mean, markets vary. It might be more in certain communities, might be less. But if you can net that much more than having a tenant in place, in most cases, it's going to be the most beneficial way to go about doing it.
So we didn't really segment our real estate in starting this conversation.
Yeah.
Now, there are different kinds of real estate.
That's right.
We've been talking about single-family
homes,
condos, things like that.
Yeah, anything and by the way, anything, and we've done a previous episode on this on commercial residential properties. Anything with 1 to 4 units is considered residential. And so you could have just a standalone, you can have a condo, you can have an attached single-family residence or a townhome. You could also have a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, and all of those would come under the category of a residential sale.
But in this case, we're talking about the single occupied home or condo.
Yeah.
Because when you are selling a property that is a multifamily, 3, duplex, triplex, quad, fourplex or more, you're going to have the tenants there.
Yeah.
It is going to be an investment property. If you're going to live in one of the 4 units, you can still get the owner occupied loan. While still getting the great rates, even though you have other tenants. Okay, so we're talking about single-family homes primarily.
Yeah.
Anything 2 and up, you're going to have the tenants.
Yeah.
They're going to stay in place.
Yeah.
Those leases are going to go to the buyer. The security deposits that were on hold for you from the tenants are going to go to the buyer because there's security deposits for the tenant, not for you.
Yeah.
You're going to have commercial property. If you have a piece of land and it's got a farmer on there and he's got a 10-year land lease or a 20-year land lease, it goes with the land.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about those kind of deals here. We're specifically talking about you own a single-family home that's an investment property that needs to get out.
Yeah, and that's most often the case in this. And by the way, we're kind of coming up on the end of our time, but there's so many different facets of this. I mean, you'd have to call us directly to talk about your scenario. There are some cases where you might have a relationship with the tenant and the tenant wants to have the opportunity to buy the home.
Sure. Can you do that?
That can certainly be done. There's even opportunities that might work for you as the seller to do seller carryback financing, where you hold the note on it. And there's some risks involved with that, but it can be depending on your scenario, it can be financially beneficial to you as well.
Yeah. And so there's all different ways to work this. And if you have a tenant and you're thinking about selling, we would love to talk to you about your very specific situation so we can talk about what is best for you.
Yep.
And again, it is our job as real estate agents to not sugarcoat anything.
Yeah.
We want to give you what we have learned through over 20 years of experience in working with situations like yours. Todd and I, if you have watched us on Instagram, we drove up to the Central Coast.
Yeah,
basically.
Central Carmel area.
Yeah, to look at a property.
Monterey.
To see if it was a good property to either purchase as an investment or to help the seller sell. And we're not going to work with this person at the end of the day, because even though we drove there all day and drove back, we believe firmly in the advice that we give. And in that situation, this person was not going to take the advice that we believed was most beneficial to this person. And even though it was a full day's work and a lot of money out of pocket to get up there and back, it turns out that it's just not a right fit for us.
Yeah.
And for her.
That's right. It doesn't benefit her. Now, what would benefit us is just to promise the world, get the listing, and then change afterwards. That's not beneficial to her, though.
No, it's not.
It's most beneficial to you, the client, if we're honest and let you know exactly what the situation is, and not give unrealistic expectations.
Well, exactly. And so as you're working through a tenant issue, we've had extensive experience.
Yeah.
From the tenant that's super nice, very, very agreeable, sad that they're losing their home, but totally understanding. Let everybody in, praise the landlord, love the home, love the community, like the dream, the absolute best scenario.
Yeah.
And then we've had the one that sued, and we've had the one that destroyed the property, and we've had the ones that needed to be evicted, and we've had the ones that needed to get arrested. We've gone from both sides of the spectrum. So we want to talk to you about your specific situation.
Yep.
Because no one is going through what you're going through right now. No one is owning your home with your tenants except for you. And so we as the Bald Brothers team would love to be an advisor and an assistant to you in that process, to help make the process smooth and simple and help you sell that investment property and take that money, either 1031 exchange it outside of California or somewhere else in the state, or bank it and live it.
Yep.
So if we can help you, I'm Aaron. And
I'm Todd.
And we're the Bald Brothers team at the Impact Realty Group here at Real Broker. And you can find us at 833-305-BALD. That's 833-305-2253. Or you can go online to
baldbrothers.tv.
Thank you so much for listening today. God bless, and we'll talk to you next week. The Bald Brothers team is a licensed DBA of Real Broker, licensed by the California Department of Real Estate, number 02022-092. Again, we do not give any real estate, legal, or financial advice. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can call us at 833-305-BALD, or you can reach us online at baldbrothers.tv. Equal housing opportunity.